nomophobia, cyberchondria, cervical kyphosis. What do you think these relate to? Drug addiction, alcohol, eating disorders, gambling? We treat these addictions as dangerous. We run campaigns against them. We even warn children about them. And yet we refuse to recognize the one addiction that most of us carry in our hands every single day: phone addiction. Phone addiction can cause so much, yet we acknowledge it so little. And if we do, we normalize it or even laugh about it. We call it being chronically online. We treat it like it's a personality trait. Why do we normalize addiction when it's technology, but stigmatize drugs and alcohol? If someone drinks every night and says they can't stop, we call that a problem. If someone gambles endlessly and says they can't stop, we call that an addiction. But if someone scrolls for 5 hours straight and says they can't stop, we call that normal. I've been in a room with people who were completely silent, all just scrolling, and later laugh and say they'd hung out. But addiction doesn't become harmless just because it's socially acceptable. If I ruled the world, I would show everyone that finding a solution to addiction is deeply personal, not universal. And the only way we can take control back is if we find a solution ourselves. We all know phone addiction is almost always connected to having more sleep, less sleep, more stress, and a generally worse quality of life. I've had nights where I told myself that I would go to bed early, but I kept scrolling. And the next morning, I was exhausted and couldn't focus in class at all. What we don't realize, though, is that this is bigger than some trends or a very annoying repetitive fact. The costs, sleep deprivation, cognitive fatigue, may be normalized, but that doesn't make them any less harmful. We tend to reduce this conversation to productivity, like how it affects grades or efficiency. But that isn't our biggest issue. Our biggest issue is our community, our identity, and how we experience life as a whole. Now, to understand why this is happening, we need to understand something called the attention economy. The attention economy is a series of companies in which constantly compete for our attention, because our attention equals profit, which makes our attention their product. I've opened an application just to reply to one message. And 5 minutes later, I find myself watching completely unrelated videos and forgetting why I even opened the app for. Think about how all your most used apps are made. Autoplay, infinite scroll, notifications, all engineered to keep you hooked. Those notifications trigger dopamine, which is the same chemical involved in gambling. Now, I'm not saying dopamine is bad. It's actually what motivates us. But when it's triggered unpredictably, it can create a powerful habit. Social media apps rely heavily on this variable reward system. We never know what we're going to see next. I've caught myself refreshing my notifications, hoping something will pop up, even though I know nothing's happened. But the effects aren't just psychological, though. There is cervical kyphosis, where prolonged forward head posture strains the spine. Thoracic outlet syndrome, nerve compression due to poor posture. The constant stimulation increases our brain's dopamine baseline. Now, we all know this. Short-form content conditions the brain to switch quickly between stimuli. Video after video, clip after clip, swipe after swipe. So what happens when we're asked to read a 20-page chapter? Or when we're asked to simply focus for just 45 minutes? It becomes harder. not because we can't do it, but because we've trained our brains differently. Normal life begins to feel slow. Studying feels unbearable, and silence feels uncomfortable. This is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure in ordinary activities. When everything is so extreme, nothing feels exciting anymore. This doesn't just affect our entertainment. It affects our relationships, our ambitions, and our passions. We look down on visible addictions while normalizing digital ones. But addiction doesn't become harmless just because it's socially acceptable. And history has shown this us before. From the spread of opium in the 19th century to the medically prescribed use of cocaine in the 1880s. In both cases, both substances were completely socially acceptable, but led to, as you can imagine, unfavorable consequences. This shows us that acceptance doesn't guarantee us safety. So what happens to a generation who can't focus for 30 seconds? What happens to creativity? What happens to innovation when true focus becomes rare? The best innovations in history, such as the printing press and space exploration, required long and uninterrupted concentration. But despite all of this, we joke, "I'm so addicted to my phone," is casually said, or "I can't survive without Wi-Fi." I've been in group chats where they joke about this through all hours of the night. And yet no one actually manages to put their phone down. When everyone's struggling with the same issue, it feels less like a problem and more like a culture. Now, there's no universal cure to addiction. Some people delete social media apps completely or set very strict time limits, while others replace scrolling with something meaningful to them. But what matters here isn't about copying other people's solutions, but about finding your own pattern. For a long time, I thought my issue with my phone was a motivational problem. I'd sit down and tell myself, just don't check it. But without even realizing it, I'd reach for it. And then I'd start scrolling. This is when I realized that it was no longer a conscious decision I was making. It had become a habit. So I started doing something very simple. I started leaving my phone in another room while I studied. At first, I was uncomfortable, constantly reaching beside me for my phone, even though it wasn't there. My brain kept telling me that I was missing something important, even though I knew that nothing was happening. But slowly, the urge faded. I could focus for longer. Studying felt calmer. And I was actually able to finish faster. Even my sleep improved when I started applying the same technique. This is when I realized something very important. That this wasn't just about willpower, but about what you were surrounding yourself with. Now, this worked for me, and it may not work for everyone else. But habits are deeply personal. But breaking phone addiction isn't about just trying harder, but about your environment and what you surround yourself with. So your habits actually have a time to change. Technology can support learning. It can help us, connect us, empower us, and open up so many opportunities for us. But addiction is addiction nevertheless. If we start treating digital dependency with the same seriousness we treat other addictions with, we can take control back. Addiction doesn't become harmless just because it's normalized. If I ruled the world, I would make sure that technology served us, not the other way around. Thank you.